Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Marc Zimmet from Zimmet Healthcare Services Group and eCap Intel. And I'm joined by two men who need no introduction. Wes Rogers from Brickyard, right? Formerly Golden Living, and Alan Litt from Monticello AM, right? So I've been doing consulting, skilled nursing for almost 30 years, and it's taken on a little bit of a different angle the last 4 or 5 years, which brings us to this panel. So we've got a perspective from skilled nursing facility operator and skilled nursing facility lender. And we are going to talk today a little bit new territory for me as far as presentation goes. So for years, I've focused on strategy, regulations, and, well, really operations from the skilled nursing facility from the operator perspective. And what's happened over the last few years, especially as, well, the market is heated up for acquisitions and growth, the industry has once again fragmented and consolidated and refragmented and reconsolidated. Very different perspective than it was, when I started 25, 30 years ago. And we've seen over the years the push from the big national perspective, where Golden Living originated when I started out in one of its Beverly, I think it was, way back then. So there were 4 or 5 national companies. That model sort of broke apart after PPS came in 1999 and went through several different iterations. But that strategy works very differently. That strategy didn't work so well in the new market. The concept was national providers capitalizing on all their ancillaries, controlling the entire continuum of care, taking risk. A lot of that stuff never really took off, or in fits and starts. But now we see a lot of those initiatives starting again. But then we went through the era of, well, turnarounds and not-for-profits divesting themselves and for-profits. But we're seeing fewer and fewer turnarounds. We're seeing deals come to the table that are, well, facilities that are operating, let's just say they're normalized. So there's only so much. The whole concept of this session this morning is about what you do, how we look at a facility, either from an operator or a risk basis from a lender, when operations are normalized and the operator that's selling, that's leaving, is efficient and they optimize reimbursement and they provide quality care. The whole contention here is that there's only so much an operator can do to improve performance beyond what the market will allow. So we see projections coming across our desk, and we've got either the rate going up $15 a day, the projection, or we've got Medicare census going up by 20%, 30%, 40%. But you can't really increase Medicare admissions when these patients aren't in the hospital. You can't really improve reimbursement when reimbursement is already the highest in the county, or the state system doesn't allow you to improve reimbursement. So we spent a lot of time over the last several years really assessing the market. And the way this started for me was 2015 from a bank calling me up, and the same questions I had received from operators all these years I was getting from the bank. They wanted to know, Trump had just received apropos to where we are, Trump had just received the nomination for the election, and he was running on the platform of repealing, among other things, repealing Obamacare. And the lender wanted to know, the bank wanted to know what repealing Obamacare, what impact it would have on the skilled nursing facility industry in this specific state. It was a state that had, opened the exchange, that had gone gung-ho, and they wanted to know what impact it would have on skilled nursing if Obamacare was repealed. And the answer was a big fat nothing, but that's not the point. That's a different story. But it got me thinking about how we look at states prospectively, how we look at specific markets prospectively. So it's very different from looking at a market today than going forward. And before I start with some examples, I want to turn it over to my panelists and let them introduce and explain how we're going to talk about what their perspective is going to be this morning on what we're talking about. So I'll start with Alan.
Good morning. My name is Alan Litt. I'm one of the founding partners of Monticello. We just recently merged with Greystone on our healthcare bridge business, Greystone Monticello. We're active lenders in the space. Last year, we originated in the skilled space around $1 billion of new loans, and we have also an ABL working capital business and a pref equity holdco mezz business.
Good morning, Wesley Rogers. I'm the president of Brickyard Healthcare. We just rebranded, have 23 nursing homes in Indiana, and it's a wonderful place to operate. We've worked really hard. I've been there 4 years, and we've just implemented operational discipline and found ways to improve the business, top line revenue, expense controls. But as we look at the current status of the industry right now, and would have an interest in growing and finding other opportunities to operate in this business, there's a lot of things that are different right now. There's a lot of there's a lot of variables that make it difficult to make a reasonable assessment of what can happen with the business and where it's at, and with the staffing crisis that we have right now, there's just some unknown variables that make it more complicated. So for me, I'm a big fan of the eCap Intel product that Marc's group has produced. They've done a lot of great consulting and provided a lot of great information over the years, and enjoy participating in their conference. But so yeah, all the information, intellectual curiosity in running a business is one of the most important things, I think, to be able to find what the recipe for success is. In nursing homes, for me, I believe that there's a different recipe for success for every single nursing home. And it's not how you fix it or how you operate it or maximize the potential to provide quality care, and financial results is different in every situation. So our philosophy has been it's a community-based business. We try to take an entrepreneurial approach to allowing the leaders to manage the business and find that path to success, and support them in any way that we can and guide them.
One of the things that I feel that's very interesting today is the business when I operated nursing homes was more instincts. You felt like this is the way to run it, and you thought this would be the best for the residents. Today, when you walk around this conference here, everybody is running this business from their iPhone. They have instant data, they have tracking software, they have metrics and other things that enable them. You were talking about, how do you get more money out of the building that the guy just finished? Well, the next generation of operators we're seeing have that data available, bring in consultants like yourself, Marc, who are helping them think about it, think about the opportunity, and then they're able to track whether or not they execute it. And without the data today, there's no way to benchmark.
So let's jump right into that, the data. The question I've been asked more than, and I know many of you have heard me say this a million times already, but the question I've been asked more in my career than any other one, other than, is Vinny and Mike single? I get that question a lot. My guys, the question I get asked more than anything is this a good state? And is this a good state? I get these calls, is this a good state? And there's always a wise ass out there that's going to come up to me, at a conference and say, what do I think about the proposed, 2% cut in Iowa for county facilities? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There's always a wise guy that's going to test me on that. But is this a good state? There's no such thing as a good state. Is it, from an operator's perspective, how is it relative to other states? So that's everything we talk about today, everything we talk about every day, is not a question of absolutes. Is this a good state? Is this not a good state? It's relative to the other states and how well you're positioned. But Alan brought up data, and obviously, a big part of this discussion is data. And I've been a big critic. Skilled nursing is the only business I know, and I really hope that data isn't this bad in other businesses. Otherwise, the country's got this far, so it's got to be halfway decent. But the data in skilled nursing is so awful that we finally kind of had to do something about it. So that's where Intel came from. This isn't going to be a commercial, but that's where Intel came from. For years, we were compiling our own data, and then we just started, basically made it into a product. So, Mark Parkinson was excellent yesterday. I really enjoyed his session. But one of the first things that come about in the discussion is what's census, what's occupancy in a market, in a state, in a county. And the prevailing wisdom is that occupancy is about 72% right now nationally. Right? Is that pretty much the you've heard that probably a dozen times, about 72%. Was 81%? So this slide, I think it's up, right? Is there, yeah. Is there a slide up, or is that, no, that's just me. No, it's not. All right, so this slide is from Intel. This is as of 2 weeks ago. This is the census, the occupancy in the country. And you don't need to see the numbers, but we obviously had the big dip. January 2021 is when we had the low point, and we've recovered about 40% of what we lost. And we're at, in January 2020, about 72%. But there's a dirty little secret here that nobody's really talking about, or it hasn't come up, and this speaks volumes about the data we have. So if we go to the next slide. Now, this is from a facility that I was asked to do diligence on about 2 months ago. And we see here the red line is the county, whatever county this facility's in. I don't want to identify it. And the yellow line shows what the facility census is. And this is as reported to the COVID national database. That's where we get our numbers. But something happened here. This facility that we were looking at is 160 beds. 160 beds. We've got our alert there down there. This facility is reporting they've only got 120 active beds. They've got 40 beds that aren't in use. So when we look at any market, when we look at census, when we look at occupancy, the numbers that we're looking at, the data, is not apples to apples. There's no context to it. So in reality, this is really, very common. There are about 1.55, 1.6 million nursing home beds in the country licensed. But I can tell you about 155,000 of those, 155,000, almost 10%, are not operational. For whatever reason, they are not in service. So when we look at 72% occupancy, it's not 72 occupancy, it's about 69% occupancy, because over 100,000 of those beds just aren't in service. So we talk in terms of practical occupancy. And I bring this up in the context of this conversation because we're seeing it more and more. Pennsylvania is a classic example, to start naming states here. Pennsylvania's got a lot of old buildings where they had triples and quads that are never going to be triples and quads again. For all intents and purposes, you're not going to have 3 and 4 bedded rooms for, obvious reasons. Or you've got a lot of older facilities that are all doubles, semi-private accommodations. You've got to make some private rooms, otherwise you're not going to get any Medicare patients. So the whole concept of per bed, price per bed, I hate that, what they're paying per bed. There's no such thing as per bed. We can call it, post-pandemic capacity. But these are all the statistics that we've relied on, all the data that we've relied on over the years that is now skewed, it's borderline worthless, and it's dangerous. So the question I'll pose to Alan and Wes is, when you're going to assess an opportunity, and we're looking at census, we're looking at occupancy, because again, occupancy as a percentage isn't a real good barometer of demand, because when you have the denominator of beds, is it licensed beds or is it practical beds? So how do you assess a market? Not the facility. We're going in, we're looking at a facility, we're looking at a transaction, but what do we look at beyond the facility that's specific to the market? So Alan, I'll start with you.
So when we're looking at the facility, we're not looking at a particular building. We're looking at that building in context of buildings within 5, 10, 15, 20 miles. Because it's not necessarily, as you mentioned, a national statistic. Each market is different. Each market is local. As my colleague here said, every market is local. So we can't look at a building. We're going to look at the hospital discharges. We're going to look at the Medicare discharges. We're going to look at how many doctors are discharging. We have, as lenders, we have all that data now. So we're able to see, is this guy who's coming in to buy the building, or gal, able to attract that census to his building from these 6 doctors? and we actually can see the flow of patients to buildings. And it's really, you can't look at a national census trend because it's so local, because you could go 20 miles one way or the other and it's a totally different business. You could do the same thing today with labor. You could have labor in one market, you have no agency. You go 20 miles to the right, there's tons of agency. So it's really looking at what's happening in that particular market, which enables you to think about how we would lend against that particular asset.
I mean, when we're looking at an opportunity, the number of licensed beds doesn't really matter, and how it's reported as a percentage of occupancy. I mean, the sweet spot for us, if we're looking at a nursing home, is between 80 to 120 beds. It just, the things just work better in fixed cost coverage and things like that with a certain size. If I'm looking at a 40 or 50 bed building in Iowa that has a hospital with 10 patients in it, I'm pretty worried about that, being able to grow that business and turn it, depending on how it's performing. So baseline performance of where facility's at or a group is at, we try to take a base case, mid case, and best case scenario. When you look at reimbursement, Medicare, Medicaid, expense controls, we kind of match up data to where we come in from a PPD standpoint, I guess, and try to come up with some different scenarios of how you can turn the business. But, you know, my experience is there's always opportunities to improve things. Even in the business that I work in today, there's still opportunities to make improvements on things. So you just have to find it, the intellectual curiosity to find out what it is to improve. Typically we're not getting a lot of looks at, you know, strong baseline performing opportunities as a whole. Most people usually tend to stay in the business. Sometimes that comes along, but it's not often. So a lot of times you're looking at turnaround opportunities, and right now I think it's even harder to forecast what the future looks like in situations like that. So that's why the data that you can have to measure risk and have an assessment on different states, if you're looking to grow into different states, I think is very important.
One thing that I'm also seeing from customers is they're starting to look at the architecture of the building in thinking about the staffing. And they're using the data that comes out of the staffing model that's currently there and saying, wait a minute, they're running this at 68 beds. If I ran this at 60, I might actually make more money. Because sometimes the new guy has a fresh new approach to actually how to operate it. And you brought up that, yes, you need private rooms to attract the better paying patients. So sometimes less is more, and thinking about how the floor plan of the building works helps you create bottom line value.
So you're going to lend on that? A 68-bed facility or a 128-bed facility, obviously, that somebody comes to you and says, we're going to operate as 110 beds.
We actually listen to the operator's business plan of how he's going to think about running that asset versus the way the other guy did. Because he either might have a dialysis program, some other kind of program, a hospice program, something else that might create greater value. And so we have to listen to them. He'll bring us all the data. Here's what's happening in the market. Here's why we think we're going to be better. And then we have to be a good listener to that guy who's going to run the building. I'm not running the building.
I got to tell you, that is really interesting. That is, I have never, and we probably looked at, 300 proposed transactions or whatever over the last year or two, and I've never seen an operator come and say we're going to operate at fewer beds than they're licensed. It's usually the other way around. Usually I'll get this facility where they're only operating on 120 beds, they're 160, and assume that they're going to get the census up to 152.
Well, you look at Massachusetts. Massachusetts now is knocking out all the 3 and 4 bedded wards.
Great example.
So everybody's coming to us with loans saying, here's my vision of how to run a building in Massachusetts. It's a new dynamic. It's a new world in Massachusetts. They're buying it based on whatever the multiple is of the beds or the revenue. That's all a different conversation. But today you have to look at Massachusetts as it's a brand new state. You can't have 3-bedded rooms.
No.
So they're going to come to us and say, I don't care what that guy was doing. This is what we're going to be doing.
Okay. That is, okay. That's, yeah, Massachusetts, I see it kind of, that's why it's so hard to price Massachusetts. It's kind of baked into the price. But Pennsylvania, at the other end of the spectrum, is what we see. Half the deals coming across in Pennsylvania cannot operate at the number of beds, but they're still priced at the number of beds that they're licensed for. So it's interesting. All right, so again, looking forward into a market, one of the issues we look at, again, the difference between looking at a market today, the current score, the current assessment, versus what we think it's going to be tomorrow, the outlook assessment, are things, let's say, like Medicare Advantage. New Jersey is a good example. New Jersey is a good example of a lot of things, and not necessarily a lot of good things, I should say. But New Jersey is traditionally very low Medicare Advantage, very low. So, if you had people come in, proposed buyers come in, they say one of the reasons they like New Jersey is because it's very low Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage we know is horrible for, most skilled nursing facilities. The per admission revenue is 50%, and it's a positive. See, I view that as a negative, believe it or not, because if we're coming in and buying the facility or bidding on the facility, we can tell you that from every other state that we've seen, Medicare Advantage follows the same kind of arc, that starts out really slow, then it gets, picks up a lot of steam, and then starts slowing down at about 45, 48%, and pretty much levels off in the mid-50s at most. So we see Medicare Advantage growth. It's all about, you said before, Wes, that there's always opportunity to improve things. There's always opportunity, and yes, to a point, but I think it's shifted that you can only improve things to the point that the market will allow you to improve things, and to the point that the market is improving. So that's really the focus. When we're looking at how things are going to be in the future, Florida is another good example. The price per bed in Florida seems to go up by the week. I mean, literally, every week I get a deal in Florida, and it's 5% more than it was last week. But one of the reasons is that we like Florida a lot going forward is because the funding has been there. And Parkinson said this yesterday also, which I thought was excellent, that the Fed sort of did their thing last year, 2020, 2021, and now it's up to the states. So when you're looking at opportunities, how do you look at what the state is doing or how the state is trending? Again, New Jersey's been horrible. New York was horrible for a little bit, and how they were treating the operators getting a little bit better. Florida, more dollars. We're seeing it different in every state. So how do you judge? How do you assess the state?
I think the price is going up because you marked it dark green in eCap22.
Yeah. Now, what came first, the chicken or the egg? No, but how do you consider the state? Do you see what the funding, what the conversation is? I heard something crazy about another state I won't mention, a smaller state, where that happens to be very, favorably rated, that they're looking at a 10% rate reduction, which I think is crazy, but, that chatter's out there. How much attention do you pay at what's going on at the state level with what they're going to do?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we look at is regulatory risk and litigation risk in certain states. There's just some states that we may not want to participate in with some of the constraints that you have there. Other than that, those are the big yes and no questions. But we would look at opportunities in a few places that other than the ones that we said no with the regulatory risk.
I think the operators who are state specific or regional specific know what's going on in their markets. And the data seems to prove on our book that if you back a guy who's local and who knows his markets, you go to Indiana, this is your guy, right? So the idea is your markets, you're able to pivot when something happens, or you're able to know it's coming so that you're able to react. Guys that are outside of the state looking in, I think, are the ones that are going to struggle the most in these ever-changing waters, because they might not be boots on the ground with really hearing what's happening with labor, or what's happening with reimbursement, what's happening with staffing or regulatory or competition in their market. If you have a building and everybody in your market's renovating, you got to be renovating. But you only know that if you're there. And the guys that are most successful in this business are guys that are there. They walk their buildings, or they have people that walk their buildings that know what's going on.
So somebody comes to you and they haven't been in a state before, and it's their first foray into a state. What are you looking for?
So we're looking for track record where they performed before, business plan of why they're going to the state, what data can they show us of how they're going to do better here than the previous guy, and also what is their commitment to boots on the ground. Is it just some guy who's flying in from LaGuardia once a week? That's probably not going to be a loan we're going to think about. But if you have the ability to have people that are embedded in the community, in the market, can drive to a building. Just recently we had a client from New York. There was a tornado that went through Mayfield, Kentucky. The nursing home was gone, and you could track on the cell phones his key people were headed toward the storm, not away from the storm. He didn't have to put someone on a plane. They were there. And I think that's the difference today in this market. You can't operate these things from New York City.
Interesting. All right, so what do you think? You mentioned Kentucky, or parts of Indiana for that matter. What's your take on rural healthcare? And how is it different?
Size, a opportunity to win business, market restrictions, constraints on just the number of available patients to take care of. I was looking at a university healthcare system that's losing $17 million a year, and they have a really low occupancy, but the university healthcare hospital system has 16,000 discharges a year, and they're not capturing any of them. There's a big missed opportunity. But we were working with some facilities in Ohio during the pandemic, and we've got 27, a census of 27 in a building with one patient in the local hospital. How are you going to grow that? It's almost nearly impossible, and it stays flat through the whole pandemic.
We've seen in the rural buildings, there might be 2-3 buildings in a community, and more than once over the last 8 years, we've seen one guy buy out the other 2 guys. Yeah. So they buy market share, turn the building into a drug rehab or something else, and you're eliminating beds, but you're also eliminating competition, because there's only so many people that live in the middle of a cornfield. And so, why share that with 3 people?
That is exactly where I was going with that. In that rural market, because some of these rural markets, and it's the way the state treats them. A lot of different topics here that sort of coalesce. We've got the concept of rate elasticity, the ability for a provider to actually impact their Medicaid rate, either through case mix or something like that. Some states, just you can't move the Medicaid rate. But the market in the rural states, you cannot leave these communities without nursing home beds. And some of the states are leaving these rural providers with almost no lifeline. Some of them, and it's scary. So a lot of our friends, over the years that have bought, they're more and more in the rural areas, more and more exposed to that rural. And now the questions are coming up, just exactly like you said, about buying out the competition, closing one of them down. We did something for that on LTC 100, the same kind of concept about buying competitors, shutting them down, and took a lot of flack for that it wasn't doable, but it is doable. I mean, it almost has to happen. So what do you think about those plans, or would you encourage a client to exit? Or
we're lenders. We never tell them what to do. Okay? That's not our job. For us to be in the business is we're supposed to be receivers of information and say, do we believe from a credit metrics this makes like sense, like a good business plan. Not like we're going to tell you do this, do that, because it's just inappropriate. They're the ones who are putting at risk the capital, the equity. They're the ones that are putting their time, their intellectual capital into doing this. And if we think that there's a good business plan, and if something's presented to us, we would do it. But it's not for us to tell an operator ever how to run a
Fair
building.
enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. What do you think, Wes, about rural?
I mean, the easiest way to fix a business, and all my people that we work with in Indiana would be able to answer this question, is to grow top line revenue. So that's always the first thing I look at. And I just think, if you're looking at a portfolio of 15 small rural facilities, I think you're challenged. If you have a couple of rural facilities with a larger cluster of facilities, I think you can make it work. You can make it work. I mean, overall, in its entirety, and it's part of a package, so you can make it work. But I do think certainly it for me, connecting the dots and trying to figure out how to fix or improve a business with small rural is definitely probably the biggest challenge.
But that's sort of like where your point on data is so important, because you could actually track not who that resident is or who that person is, but you could track where they came from, what zip codes they came from, where they went to the hospital, where they come back, and you're just going to be able to see for yourself that some of these rural markets can't anymore sustain, the number of beds and the physical plant conditions that are necessary just through the data.
All right, so switching to data, I was going to ask you what data you're using, how are you using the data, but I want to ask more, do you trust the data that you're using? Where is it coming from, and does it mean the same thing in state to state? Because there's no national industry, it's all over the place. So how do you normalize that data? What are you using to track? And more importantly, how are you using that data to predict which way the market is going?
Well, isn't this so that we're all supposed to use your system?
No, that's not it. That's the yes, but no.
So I think for us as lenders, we're receiving data from multiple sources that we trust and that we've vetted. And then we reinforce that by pulling data on each loan. So we have a benchmarking tool that enables us to see within a zip code what exactly operating costs are based on our overall portfolio. So that's what we're doing to look and to verify the numbers. Not so much, trusting someone else to say what the numbers are, but verifying for ourselves.
I mean, we build our own data. We use dashboards, our own internal dashboards, and then there's certain things that are very challenging for us to get accurate data point on, like rehospitalizations, for example. That's not an operating metric, but it's a clinical outcome that's very important. And man, it's really hard to nail that down and get something that's for certain. That is real. I mean, to get the claims-based information and how that affects your quality on the CMS 5-star system, I mean, you're kind of shooting in the dark sometimes with things like that, which is very much a challenge as an operator.
And Marc also talked about yesterday the ancillary services. How much of that, when you're looking at an opportunity, do you factor in prospectively? Whether they have an operator has their own pharmacy. I mean, would you lend on a facility that you don't see much upside to, but the ancillary opportunities are there?
So again, that would be micromanaging underwriting. Yeah, we would rather look at an overall business plan. Each data point adds up to the whole data point. So whether they own a pharmacy or not, what's happening in that market? If that guy's no longer there, what is pharmacy going to cost the next guy is really our question. Okay, number one. Number two is, how is their business plan arranged with their ancillary partners? And is it where everybody's aligned in interest, either in JVs or other kinds of relationships where everybody's making money sitting around the table?
What about you, Wes, in terms of the ancillaries?
I mean, as we look to build a sustainable business into the future, I think you're always having to look at additional opportunities to for revenue streams and to make the ancillary business is certainly a good opportunity for surrounded with nursing homes, pharmacy, therapy, home health, hospice. So yeah, I mean, looking into the future, I think it's going to become even more imperative to have ancillary businesses with our facilities.
Yeah, the ancillary businesses are tough. Therapy was the big one, and for all intents and purposes, we just lost therapy. You know, therapy just doesn't work as that model anymore, not nearly as well. And the pharmacy is a little bit tougher. But yeah, I tend to agree with you that without the scale, without the regional scale and the optimizing all those ancillary services becomes real difficult. All right, but what about innovation? You know, this is very market specific. We're looking at a state, different parts of the state. You can have some heavy accountable care organization activity, bundling. In other parts of the state, you have nothing. I mean, how are you handicapping that? Or is that something that keeps you up at night or not?
I think everything keeps us up at night. So it's holistically thinking about the whole operation. These are operating businesses like hotels, and so there's so many moving parts. That's one of the moving parts. And we think that if there's something happening on one part of the state, it's only a matter of time till it comes across to the other part of the state. And we actually think it's more regional, like you were talking about in New Jersey with, I don't know, are these, Medicare Advantage programs coming? They're all around New Jersey, so it's only a matter of time till they get to New Jersey.
Wes, how do you deal with it?
I don't see, unless you were in a large metropolitan area, I don't see ACOs driving a significant amount of the business. No, it's hard work. First person to say yes usually gets a referral.
This is going back a year and a half, and PDPM was in, and I went to I won't name the hospital, but it was in northern New Jersey, and I was asked to come in to speak to the case managers, and I literally overheard a conversation / argument because PDPM has got this weird, quirk to it, I suppose, that when you drive down length of stay, your average rate goes up. So if you have a 5-day average length of stay in northern New Jersey, on PDPM, you have like $1,000 a day rate. So that was actually coming back into hurting facilities on that metric. It all goes back, how do you measure this stuff? And how do you measure it so that your partners, the stakeholders understand? And how do you process that? I mean, we're getting into the weeds here, but this is what we see more and more with underwriting, that these are the facts that aren't understood. Even when we get deeper into it, and I didn't want to get too technical in this session, but things like, I can't tell you how many times we'll look at projections where there's an iSNP, for instance, and you've got this Medicare replacement revenue, and that's just lumped in to managed care revenue, and they wind up with an average length of, an average rate per day of $600 a day, because they're lumping in stuff that shouldn't be there. How do you get through all this?
So, giving you a compliment to your system, instead of trying to figure out exactly what that building's going to do over the next 24 months of a loan, you're actually drawing data from the government showing generally this is what's happening in this market. So you're looking at, from an underwriting perspective, a blended rate. No one's a superstar every day. It's just not possible. So what you want to do is you want to say, okay, what is the blended rate in this market? What feels comfortable to us that's generally achievable without being that highly tuned that you're going to think about as a lender the average length of stay for a particular resident. The data is just impossible for us to process. So technologies like yours and others that are out there are helping people think about generally what's happening. What is a target is it 550 to 600 a day? Can we feel comfortable that the market will sustain that?
That's exactly what the credit committee doesn't want to hear from me. That's exactly it. I agree with you 100%.
The
I agree
difference
with you
is
100%.
the difference is I am the credit
Yeah, I
committee,
know.
and my partner Tom
I
is
am
the other
the credit
half.
committee. I like that line. I am the credit committee. That's
But
good.
it's important that you can't, as lenders, pinpoint where you're telling the truth. This building's going to do 972 in Medicare. It's just not possible. You really should be looking at not if this guy was running it, but generally in the market, how are people doing? Because you have to look at your downside. If you have, I haven't had it, but if you had a foreclosure, that what would we do if someone else had to run it? It's always, our metrics is not if this person is doing it, but how can other people do it and generally make an NOI?
All right, so one more question, last question, and then I'll open up to questions. We had to make up a state in my office. There are 51 states now. So we made up the great state of East Carolina. It's lovely this time of year. Check it out. So you've got an operator coming to you. They want to buy in East Carolina. Or Wes, you're looking at a portfolio in East Carolina. And you get 5 questions that you get to ask about East Carolina. What are those questions? What do you want to know about East Carolina?
Medicaid rate calculation, how it's determined, is probably really important for me. Regulatory risk. Market demographics for age, I think would be important. And the workforce now, which seems to be the most important thing. So there's 4. I don't know about the 5th one.
Well, now, Alan, before you go, I'll tell you about a conversation I had with the Medicaid director of East Carolina, which is based on a true story. Yeah, I know that the facilities could use a rate increase. Our rates are too low. But if we go give a $10 a day rate increase, all that's going to happen is that the next guy who sells is going to sell for another $1.5 million. The buyer's going to have more, debt burden, and we're going to be right back into where we started, and it'll unduly enrich the people who are already there. Now, answer in the context of that conversation with the Medicaid director.
So the original question was, what are the top 5 things?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we have like a David Letterman top 10 list.
Okay.
Because, right? Yeah. Because, and our top 10 list is starts with 5 things: character, competence, technology, tactics, and boots on the ground. And if you have those 5 things to start with, and you have a track record, that's what we're focused on. East Carolina is important, but it's not really relevant until we get past those first 5 things.
Fair enough.
And base rate increases, I mean, that's not something that I would rely on as an operator.
See,
There's metrics that you can have control over. You're actually, case mix index state, you're actually providing more care for the resident. Oh, by the way, you document it, you're going to get paid a little bit more money. There's so much missed opportunity there. There's a lot of organizations that never really focused on things like that, which can turn out to be a lot. I ran a building in Colorado, and we worked on that for 1 whole year. I found this lady in North Carolina, and she was an excellent MDS nurse, and myself and the whole MDS team set on a call once a week for a year, and we had $1 million improvement in revenue just from case mix in one building.
Yeah, case mix. It's just really interesting that you said that counting on base rate increases is not that important, and that is such a rational, logical, reasonable answer. But it's just not. I can't tell you how many, proposed transactions rely on those increases to base rates.
I mean,
and that's where it gets tough.
I mean, you have really no way to forecast what's going to happen there, though, right? So
States can do whatever they want.
I take it out of the equation and find other opportunities.
Alan, you agree with that? If you took base rate increases out of the equation altogether, wouldn't change anything?
It's not important because it's not one thing that makes this business go. There's so many moving parts that it is important to have revenue. Okay, we get that part. But as a part of everything that's happening in the building, all right, it's not as important as it once was, because you could make money within the money.
You know, I just realized something, that by the time deals get to us, those questions become more important. They wouldn't get to us otherwise, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
You know? All right, I'm going to open up to any questions. By the way, if you had a late night show, the two of you, I would listen to it, honestly. You know, David Letterman top 10 list. All right, any questions? Open it up. Yes?
Any update on IGT in Indiana? What the program
Had
might be
this
doing?
conversation, yeah.
That's a loaded question.
IGT update.
I think we're safe for probably 3 to 4 years before there's any drastic changes. It's changes coming. We're hoping it could be a net neutral change. It's going to be more tied to, there's going to be more quality, value-based metrics involved related to such, but it's a good program, and it's been good for Indiana. But I think we're pretty safe for right now.
I think if you look at the way HUD looks at IGT, they give it like a 20 to 30 cap rate, because they're assuming the same thing. Somewhere between 3 and 5 years, there's going to be a buttering off here of what's happening, and that's a rational risk approach.
When those three letters come into the equation, it's like throwing kerosene on the fire sometimes, when you're depending on it or not depending on it. But yeah, that comes up a lot. I'd actually like some definitive answers on that one. I really would. Any other questions? Mr. Littlehale?
Oh. Look at there.
I'm not inspiring or perspiring today.
Okay, very good, very good. Gentlemen, what importance do you place on 5-star?
Not a lot. It's part of an overall scope of looking at a building or the track record of an operator. And right now, it's really unfair because a lot of the buildings haven't been resurveyed. So quite frankly, the data is skewed a few years old. But what we would be looking at is their quality measures, their staffing metrics, you know, how they're performing on current surveys they're receiving. You got to dig in a little deeper. We built a technology to analyze that, because it's just, sometimes it's just not fair right now to the operator because he hasn't had a survey in 2 years. And that's not reflective of the culture that he has in the building if he bought the building when it was a 1-star. So we mute that.
Is it fair to say you're looking at the same metrics, but you're peeling back the cover to get a little deeper into the, okay, thank you. Yes.
I love the question. I think it's very important to look at 5-star. Do I think it's fair? Do I think it's a good way to measure overall the performance of a facility? No. But it's vitally important for growth. If you have 1-star facilities and you've got survey history of 3 years, it's going to be a constraint to growing that to a 3-star building or above. You're not going to have contracting opportunities with managed care organizations. And then I just think it is a good indicator as to, you know, how well people are managing the business overall. Some people don't really care about it. Some operators don't care about it. I've talked to one operator that he could care less if he has 1-star facility or a 5-star facility. I think it shows a lot of discipline if you're managing and have good 5-star ratings. So that's a plus to me.
I think today you could look in the quality measures section, you could look in the staffing section, you could see really what's happening on a trended basis. And so that's enabling us to see a little bit about, as lenders, what's happening, but it's muted right now. It's hard.
Yeah, Stephen, it's like you just told him there's no Santa Claus when you said that. You know, it's bad. Not very much. All right. Anybody has any questions? We'll take them. Otherwise, up. Yep.
Thank you. Following on the 5-star and the comment on ancillary revenue streams, Mark, I've asked this question to you over the years. Any correlation of star rating and EBITDA, which I think we did mute over the period of time, but how about in terms of ancillary services, the ability to attract and procure the type of census that you seek to have those revenue enhancements? You can control the expenses, as Alan mentioned, but I'm trying to figure out how you get more sustainable top-line revenue.
Sustainable top, it's average rate per day and census. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
The whole thing with 5-star, and Stephen did a lot of work on this also. There's a real correlation between 5-star and Medicare fee-for-service admissions, but there's almost none with 5-star and Medicare Advantage admissions. Is that right? Or at least rate per day. So it's not, I'm of the, the opinion on 5-star that it's almost market by market. It's everything or it's nothing. Because in rural markets, it seems to be nothing. Obviously, you don't have that much choice. In certain competitive markets, urban markets, it's everything. That you can't get contracts or you get excluded from networks. But it depends. That's it. That's why I don't.
But Steve, going to your question about people using ancillary services to enhance the care, it's really tough for us because some people do really well outsourcing therapy and other services, Part B, and they feel that's better for the way they want to run the building. And other people sit down with us at the table and say, no, I have to run the whole thing. I want to be responsible for that. Different people have different ways of doing it. I haven't found one that's particularly right or wrong. I just think that some people have different models and how I don't want to be responsible, or I can't find the people, or I can't staff it, versus I've got this, I want to do it myself.
All right, I think that is one more. What did I say? Nope. All right, I guess. No, I missed something. Oh, we got one more. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. One comment and one question. The comment as far as, information sources when you're new to a state, and again, I'll admit my bias, I'm with the Wisconsin Healthcare Association, but the state trade associations, whether it's a leading age affiliate or the ACA affiliate, are great sources for on-the-ground environmental information across the state. My question is, does the physician practice environment make a difference to your analysis? And what I mean by that, you look at a state like Wisconsin, which is over 90% employed physicians, mostly with hospital system medical groups, versus a state, and it's been years since I've been in New Jersey, but I'll take New Jersey or New York, where maybe that percentage, it's increasing, but it's like 50 or 60% of employed, so that you still have at least close to the majority of the traditional private practicing physicians. Does that footprint make a difference in your analysis?
I've never used that as a point of consideration in an analysis, but I will say that we've got a big challenge with medical care in nursing homes with physicians. It's something that we've been working on. It shouldn't be a side gig. That's what I'm trying to say.
I can tell you, Rick, I can tell you one thing. Nice to see you, first of all. Second of all, yeah, we should go to Atlantic City, actually, is what we should do. But I can tell you that physician practices are causing a lot of havoc, a lot of good things and rough things, especially on the ISNP model, and anything that's predicated on Part B and risk adjustment. So I just make that comment because physician practices are probably it's like the new ancillary service, if you will. Operators taking advantage of that. Forget therapy, forget pharmacy, forget, hospice. It's physician services, specialty services. So we just hit a nerve on that. We could do a whole session on that one. So. And Wisconsin is a, favorable state. It is. All right. Well, there you go. Thank you very much.